was forwarded.
So we're just giving it a few minutes. Linda's in the hallway, so. Good morning, everyone. The time is now 9:06. We apologize for starting a few minutes late. First item on the agenda of the School Building Committee is welcome and introductions. My name is Brian DeCruz. I'm the chair of the committee, as well as the vice president of the town council. And to my right,
Kate Massinanti.
you got to speak into the mic, please.
Kate Massinanti, School Committee.
J.C. Northup, School Committee, and Secretary of this committee.
Amy Reiner, Director of Administrative Services.
Sam Bradner, Peregrine Group.
Tom Leska, Bentley Downs.
Dave DeQuatro, RGB Architects.
Tracy Donnelly, RGB Architects.
Rob Zarnetsky, Town Manager.
Zachary Saul, Finance Director for the town.
Marianne Crawford, Chief Financial Officer for the school.
Wayne Pimentel, Building Official.
Mark Russo, Facility Superintendent for the town.
Melissa Toll, Commercial Interior Designer and Community Member.
All right. And according to the town manager today, we are live streaming, just so everyone knows. So it'll be recorded as well, so people can go back and look at it. Next up on the agenda is item number 2, approval of minutes from January 22nd of 2020. You should have all received this in an email, but you do have a copy as well. Any questions or edits? If not, if someone would like to make a motion.
Motion to approve the minutes.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Passes unanimously. All right. Next is item number 3, acceptance of correspondence. J.C., I believe you said you had some correspondence?
Okay, we did receive some, and I did forward it to everyone pretty much upon receipt, to the best of my ability. So we received an email from Lauren Weinstock on Friday, January 24th, titled Maintaining Order During Building Committee Meetings. We received an email from Richard McIntyre on Monday, January 27th, titled School Building Plans. And then I also forwarded to you Rob Zarnetsky's reply and also Rick McIntyre's reply to him. So everyone should have all of that. And I do have hard copies of all of these if anybody wants them. I kind of thought that maybe that was an abundance of paper to go home with, as you did all receive them. And maybe we'll refrain from printing all the emails, because if you don't need them, we probably shouldn't waste the paper. But totally not my call. Another correspondence we received was from David Pelizzetti. His was dated Tuesday, January 28th, and titled Curtis Corner High School. And again, you guys received that. And then lastly, not lastly, but I also have an email from Mark Levitt. His was received Friday, January 31st, and it's titled Curtis Corner and ... And you all, his was accompanied with an attachment, and you all received that as well. And then we also have one directive officially, and then one not so officially that we can discuss later that we weren't really sure if it was our to give authority from. So this is from the school committee, and it's just simply the vote saying, yes, go forward with the high school at Curtis Corner. And you all received that.
Okay. And the other item you're going to bring up later in the meeting, or?
Yeah, it's just about the bond.
Okay.
We also voted to do the referendum in November. But we weren't really sure if that was, we knew we needed to discuss it, but we weren't really sure whose authority, it's up to the town council.
Correct.
So
Yeah.
we weren't really sure if it was ours to even ask you to do it. We didn't know. So it's not official.
I would leave that up to the town council. In regards to printing of correspondence, I think that would be a waste because everyone gets an email with the correspondence. All right, next up on our agenda for today is number 4, the Peacedale Elementary School Parking Lot Improvement Project Update. And who would like to take that? Anything else on just February 25th, the bids are due? All right, sure, go ahead.
There's nothing else outstanding, like we have, everything else is like I's dotted, T's crossed, permits pulled, the whole 9 yards. Whatever's needed for that. And then they have their own, okay, thank you.
All right, number 5, the Stage 2 necessity of construction application update.
Sure. Mr. Chairman, Sam Bradner from Peregrine Group. What I thought would be useful for the committee and folks in the community is just to kind of lay out what we see as the roadmap in front of us. This is not 100% prescriptive, and there's a lot of other sub-items that are here, but I think it'll give a good outline to the building committee about what we, at the OPM team, I think the AE will share in these. They may have some additional thoughts on this, about the steps that have to happen now that both the building committee and the school committee approved moving forward with the Curtis Corner plan as part of the revised Stage 2. So we had the approval in January by both bodies. What the team is doing right now is actually scoping that next step of the process. So all the work now that has to happen, and we'll go into this detail a little bit, for that revised Stage 2 submittal that will happen sometime in the summer of 2020, which is the goal of both, I think, the community and the team. The first step that we're going to do, and if you recall, we did this in a smaller group and then reported out to this committee back in September. We're going to revisit the whole schedule mapping process that we did as a team. We're basically going to look at every single piece of this process that has to be executed in order to get to a Stage 2 submittal, as well as all the way through to approval, and if the collective bodies agree to it, then the bond support that would happen in November. The Stage 2 process, as you all know, you all went through this already once, is exhaustive. What I've listed here is just some of the major items that we have to go through. And if you've seen, and I'll just flip over to this document real quick, if you've seen RIDE's Stage 2 requirement document, which is available online, this is all the work, and I'm not going to show you all this, but this is all the work that has to go into the Stage 2 submittal. What I've tried to do in my document here is just give you a highlight of all the items that have to be collected specifically around Curtis Corner. Because remember, the first look was high level, 30 to 45 days, really just to kind of assess, could we fit the program onto the property. That's going to include data collection, site survey, understanding of systems and infrastructure. Geotech, while it's not a requirement, there's been a lot of discussion around ledge, and I would suggest that we would want to at least have some initial borings done out on that property so that we can better understand where the limits are of obstructions that we might see underground. Yes, Melissa.
I believe that some studies of the ledge have been done in the past, correct?
So I do want to just make everyone aware at the table, we have had an APRA request come in from a member of the public, and they did ask for any known site conditions based on, prior work at South Road, at Curtis Corner, and at the Playfields properties. So we are gathering that material now. We're working with the respective departments, and we will be providing that to this committee.
Yeah, Melissa, I don't know if, and I'll ask RGB, I don't know if true geotech borings were done during the previous studies. They typically wouldn't be done at this early stage, but Dave or Tracy, I don't know if you know that answer.
In fact, I would, if for people that don't know what borings are, it's the size of a Coke can, and they drill it into the ground, sometimes 2,500 feet. And what they try to find is refuse, which means resistance, i.e. rock, or they kind of capture what the material is made for bearing capacity. Structural engineer uses that for the design of their footing. So in this case, I think we should more or less, because we know they're going to be spread footings, we know it's New England, we know the frost level, I would recommend doing test pits, and you can do that with the town's backhoe and with the civil engineer. That would give you not only a look, because I've done projects where we've missed the rock because we've done 20 borings the size of a Coke can, and the rock is between the Coke cans. Ledge doesn't always go flat. Ledge goes up and down. It's like an iceberg below the ground. So if you do test pits, you can pretty much gather not only where that subsurface rock may be as an interference barrier for the foundation, but also what that characterization of that soil is. And it's less expensive.
So I just want to chime in here and point out, one, so far I've not been able to find any evidence that we have borings data or anything in Town Hall. The blueprints that we've got for the previous construction, both for the school and for the fields, it's not all that informative. It's not going to tell us where the ledge is. And what's more, we're going to a place where the blueprints and the data we've got don't cover. We're going between the fields and the school. So we'd still need to do some investigation over there. What would be helpful is if we're going to do pits, if pits is the right way to go about it, and I see no qualm with that approach, we're going to need to know how deep, and I'm going to want to get the Public Works crew out there ASAP. There is a potential for disruption and problems doing pits while the kids are in school, so we've got to figure out how to make sure that we're not digging holes that become a hazard. Beyond that, just let us know how deep, and we can get out there and coordinate with the school.
Yeah, and I think the structural engineer, Rob, would give a prescriptive plan around locations, depth, and then we're
going pad or we're going full foundation. Do we know? We have any?
Foundation.
Yeah.
You typically don't do any kind of a pad unless you have some kind of a subsurface problem.
Right.
I would also, you got to check water table. That's your other issue that comes up. So you want to go down 4 feet, see what the water table, and possibly, I don't know, with the boom, perhaps one of you guys could tell us the boom of the backhoe before you get an excavator out there is probably 8 to 10 feet. You would know that, right? So you want to go down one pit, you go down as far as you can to find out where that water is. If the water's farther down than 4 feet, then you're not going to have a problem.
We're not going to be 4 feet. We're going to be higher than that, I almost guarantee you.
Okay, so that's one of the things you want to find, because that could deter the type of foundation you use and also the type of mat you use underneath that foundation when you want to keep water stops in it or any kind of bituminous material stopping the water from coming out.
All right. Well, again, just get us some specs ASAP, and we'll get somebody out there.
Regarding foundations, we're not talking about full basements or anything like that? Okay. Just wanted to make sure. Okay. I was only asking because I didn't know if you were going to be running utilities below or above.
Try not to run utilities underneath any kind of a building, because if you have to access them in the future, it just makes it cost prohibitive, so you run them either parallel or alongside.
Okay. Thank you.
Sam mentioned on his list about a survey. Is there a survey on that?
Yeah, so again, right now, typically, I see where we're doing survey even after stage 2. I would say that given the importance of making sure that we want to assess feasibility here, that a site survey, at least a boundary, establishing existing conditions, maybe you don't do full topography, maybe you're not doing full, say, inverts on all your existing utilities, but some level of site survey is going to be important, again, to vet the feasibility of the project. And I think we're going to have to kind of scope appropriately what we think the right level of data collection is. Obviously, there's a cost to data collection, so you're balancing that against making sure that you have all the right information. It's no different than the underground investigation work that we're talking about.
So I have a question, Rob, for what you had just commented on. There's been extensive work out there between the roads, and they changed. We had the hill, the walkway was over hill, and then we went through the hill. There isn't any documentation about that. I mean, it's been over the course of the past 40 years.
Not that we've found so far. I mean, record keeping is as much an art as it is a science, and we don't have a librarian or archivist who brings the science to the record keeping or has historically brought the science to the record keeping in Town Hall. What I've seen so far that seems to be responsive to the inquiry, which is what's out there, what's going on, what do we know about the site, is blueprints for the construction of the fields and some of the structures out there. The blueprints are done by an architect knowing what he knew at the time that before the construction of the facility. We don't have, or we've not discovered yet, as-builts that would describe the conditions that they encountered while building. So the architect's drawing's got, little symbols representing rock, but they're well below and out of the way of everything. And really, the only place I've seen those symbols is where it was being used as a building material or as a building finishing, where we were building a footbridge across a stream, that kind of thing. There's no indication in the materials that I've seen so far that indicate where we've got ledge, how deep the ledge is, where we've got a water table. Those.
So typically those are found in the specification will have those in the beginning part. If the addition was done prior to 1980, chances are there is no.
All of this work was done in the 70s and before that.
Robert?
I'm talking about recent work that's been done with the roadways and the fields. There's been work done exactly where we're talking over the past 20, 30 years. I would assume someone would have to know where the ledge is in order to build the road that leads back to those fields.
Rob, I'd just like to comment on our information based upon the APRA request we had. Yesterday, we pulled up quite a few of the plans from the middle school. We have the original plans from, I think it was Robert Hay, when they built that school, as well as the subsequent addition and administration building. There is quite a bit of information, site information, survey information. There's data on the soils because there was a septic system put in there, so there's resistance depths, there's water table depths that may be beneficial. Again, it may not be in a spot where the new additions are going, but at least it'll give some representation and some information going forward. So we have that information in our office available for the person that requested the APRA.
And Public Services has also indicated that they have 2 large boxes as well of information that they've maintained. So we'll review everything that we have and make anything available as part of the
I don't know,
response.
does school facilities maintain any building plans? So perhaps maybe some of that information could be found there on the other work that was done.
But again, my cautionary note here is the records are limited, and the records are limited both in terms of the area where the records apply to. They're not going to apply to the open spaces. And you're correct. There may be a 12-foot swath of land that goes through a portion of what we're contemplating as the construction site, but we'd still need to investigate what's going to happen directly under the building or the site where the building would go.
And I think we'll take into account any available data. It's all very useful. Then it'll be, okay, how does it apply, say, to the footprint and the extended area for that site development or that building development work, and then trying to compile the best information we can. And it's going to be a balance, right? It's going to, the geotech, if you do it in-house with the town doing it, that's much more cost-effective. If you were bringing in a geotech to do the borings, you'd be looking at, okay, how many borings do I want to get? How many borings can we afford within this first pass at the budget? And where is that line? And a little bit of interpolation to try to figure out where's, how much data do you collect?
I just want to repeat for the record an assertion just made by our private sector consultant. Public sector workers are more cost efficient in this case.
As opposed to cost effective.
Do you think they're not going to be effective?
I won't have a battle of words with you, Rob. I know I will lose. So, and again, this list is not necessarily meant to drill down into every little piece here. I think it's more to just understand kind of the level of information that we haven't even scratched the surface on yet. And again, this was all done previously, right? So all this information, all this analysis was done for the existing high school when that was the go-forward approach. And the team is going to have to do all that now. Demographics, we know that's been a hot topic. We knew even last time, if we were resubmitting just on the renovation of the existing high school, that a demographics update would be required. There will be one here. Alternatives analysis, and these are all kind of right off the list from RIDE. I think we've probably done several alternative analyses that will fit into this criteria, but it will be something we'll have to do. Programming, update to the ed specification. Obviously, we're shifting from what was the existing renovation of the existing school to this different location. How do we meet the high-performing school requirements? Any chips, green, sustainability, all the things we've talked about. Traffic, we've done that work to a certain level. We need to make sure that it is sufficient to support the application.
So, Sam, on the demographics, what are we thinking our timeline ought to be here? When do we have to go?
I mean, I would want to work with obviously ownership and RGB, and I think talk to RIDE too about when the application is coming in, so we have a good understanding of when we need to slot that.
So that's actually my concern, because I think if I remember the regulation correctly, it's 6 months. The window is 6 months before the submission. If we're going to submit in August, we're here. I mean,
we're probably within
now.
Yep.
Yeah, they like to see it within 6 months of when you submit.
Right.
Yeah, and again, I think we had a lot of discussion. I know you guys, discussion predates me as well, is about what is the right demographic source to look into. So I think that's something that the team needs to look through. Energy modeling, again, these are all requirements by RIDE, the schematic design, cost estimating, and then finance plans. So all these things were part of your original Stage 2 application, and we're going to have to revisit those now that we are changing kind of the program and the elements that are within the overall project. Just to touch on a couple other major items, project budget cap management. We know that this is extremely important to not only everybody in this room, everybody on the team, but also the entire community. How do we manage to the approved budget? And this is an iterative process. I know that can be painful for folks, but what we need to ensure is that we're providing those checkpoints throughout the process that allow the team to revisit cost, program, and design to ensure that not only are we meeting the educational goals and needs of the community, the facility needs of the community, but also the budgetary constraints of the community. That's not an easy process. We just went through it once. We're going to have to go through it again, and it's going to be looking at every single component of the entire application. So not only the high school proposal, but also the elementary schools and the middle school to ensure that all these can fit under that $85 million cap. And if we have to make adjustments in there, we're going to do that evaluation and make those recommendations and get that feedback from the various levels of approval through the process.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, just one question on the schedule that we see up here. I see spring, fall 2020. There's been some discussion about submission earlier than fall. Should we read anything into this? Are you suggesting that we really ought not to be aiming for August or earlier, that we really ought to be looking to approvals in or for a fall submission?
I was trying to be a little bit more comprehensive so the Stage 2 process we see is spring, summer.
Yep.
We don't know when yet because we haven't done our mapping process. Okay. When we go down below, from my perspective, the community engagement and the public approvals are continuous, even though there's going to be an intensity, say, early on to get, if you choose to go with the November bond, you're going to have community discussions, community engagement forums, open houses. You're also going to have building committee, school committee, town council, RIDE, other approval processes that are going to go up and down depending on where we are in the steps. So I'm just trying to let everybody know that those span actually, I would argue, all the way up until your vote date and the approval by RIDE, which is why you have the fall designation there. Don't read anything into it except for me trying to be comprehensive in what that total span of time is going to be for those steps.
That's fine. I just want to make sure that we're sort of keyed into the approvals at the local level that matter.
And that's what we would be doing in that mapping session, right. To say let's just pick an arbitrary date, if July 15 was the day that we knew we wanted to submit to RIDE, not saying that's the date, but we would want to back out well in advance of that the steps that need to go through building committee's recommendation to school committee's recommendation to town council, for not only the Stage 2, but then you have a whole bond approval process where you have to submit the enabling legislation to the General Assembly. That has to get approved. So there's a lot of different steps that we're going to have to map out in this process.
But the point there is that those approvals come early in this schedule, not late in this. They come in the spring.
I would say last third as opposed to
actually,
at the middle third.
For a referendum approval, the legislation needs to move ASAP.
I would agree. So I don't think they sit specifically in one piece of this or another because there are going to be all these different steps that you're going to have to go through at different points in the process. You will, to your point, your referendum, your enabling legislation will need to be before the Assembly so they can approve before the end of session at the end of June. You guys will help us map out if it needs to be to the Assembly by June 1, then what are the dates that you have to back out to get that in there so that you've got it in. You may have to do it earlier, just to ensure that it gets on their agenda and their docket so that it can be advanced.
That train has already left the station. It hasn't reached its destination, but it has been the recommendation of the school committee that the town council consider approving a bond referendum and seeking legislative authority to do so for November. So that train's already running.
Yeah. And in other districts, similarly, we typically had started right around this time, late winter, early spring, to ensure that the local delegation is in the process of putting that together at the request of the local sponsor and then kind of moving up through that process because we all know how long it'll take to kind of meander through that
Sam, is it possible to get a schedule of dates? I would feel more comfortable having specific dates, target dates that we know we have to hit, going from November and working back to where we are today. Just in case, once the submission is submitted to RIDE, if it gets bounced back, we need a cushion there, just so we know specifically when it's going to be submitted. I mean, I'm sure at this point you would have a pretty good idea of a target date of when it's going to be submitted to RIDE.
I don't have that yet, Wayne, but that'll be our first step, is that mapping process that we reference up top here, revisit process mapping schedule. So that will be step one of this team. Is, if you recall the schedule we issued back in September that had probably 30 lines on it, we're going to revisit all those lines. We might get rid of some, we might add some, but those would then tie into actual dates. This was really meant to just kind of illustrate the work that the collective body has ahead of itself, and then how do we get underway with that work. So yes, we would definitely have that as an early exhibit back to this group, and then use that as our roadmap.
Thanks.
I have a question. So when you do get that schedule together, can you please make sure that we each get a hard copy of that? Because I know that's something we're going to just want to reference every meeting, so as opposed to the digital. I also think having a hard copy of this would be useful.
I'll issue it to the group for distribution to the chair, and I can bring a hard copy or
that.
So.
No. This is awesome, and I love having it overhead. That's super useful. I just feel like this document in particular, we're going to, and even more so, the hard schedule is something we'll come back to.
Melissa, if I could interrupt and just say,
sure.
Before he distributes that, we should add to it. We weren't privy to this list ahead of time, and we've got some adds to it. Like RIDE came up with their new regulations starting in January, so that's going to affect your old submission. You've got an impact on your middle school, concern about the budget, and we may have to look back at the middle school for a smaller, more cost-efficient plan, may have an impact on submission to RIDE. The same thing with your elementary schools. So those should be sprinkled on this list a little bit. So we should look at it and then give our input before it gets distributed, so you have one copy.
And again, not meant to be the be-all, end-all, this list. This is meant to be a way to illustrate out to this group today kind of the activities that we know we're going to have in front of us. We know that we'll drill down on each of these. To Dave's point, there's going to be continued review of every single set of plans that have already been produced, because we're going to be checking that against budget as we understand better about what the high school is starting to do, and how do we manage all that within that total project cap.
I think this is a great first step, and yes, if you can make it more thorough, I don't think anybody's going to object to that. When do you think you'll have that schedule?
So our hope is that the team will be engaged no later than March 1st. So we're going through scope reviews right now. Dave and Tracy are working with all their sub-consultants, because remember, they have a team of probably 5 to 10 sub-consultants that are working under them to support this go-forward process. So Dave and Tracy are assembling all that data. We want to get that before kind of the key leadership group first, then that'll have to go through its approval process. I've been pretty adamant, don't go forward until we have an executed contract for the AE's benefit. So our goal is that on March 1, at the latest, we are go, and that scheduling mapping process would be the first step in that discussion. So it'll be early next month. If we can pull it into late February, we will try to do that.
Okay, thank you.
So that's, again, this is more just to kind of let everybody kind of understand what's in front of us. There'll be a lot more information, a lot more data coming as we start to ramp up. But, I thought it would just be useful just for everybody to kind of digest a little bit about, yes, we got to an agreement by the collective committees that Curtis Corner was the right step forward. That now means all the hard work starts now. And I know it's hard because you guys have been through several cycles of this discussion. But we just want to, everybody wants the answer tomorrow. And all this information has to kind of come into play, not only for the high school, but then how does it impact how we look, to Dave's point, how we look at the elementary schools and the middle school as well. So you can't just hit a button and then all of a sudden all this information appears. So there's a lot of hard work ahead. I know that Dave and Tracy and their team are ramping up in anticipation of coming to an agreement and getting this.
Mr. Chairman, one more question. Sam, I'm going to ask for your sort of professional advice at this point on what in some ways are not necessarily conflicting, but competing objectives or competing approaches. On the one hand, the town council, through the school building committee, has been asked to consider putting a bond referendum for $85 million on the November ballot. The idea there is move the project forward as quickly as we can because we think we've got the right project and we ought to pursue that project. On the other hand, we've got this cap management concept that you're introducing in this schedule, which suggests the number it may move. It has to move. I mean, numbers within an order of magnitude budget are just that. They're order of magnitude numbers. They're not going to stay the same throughout the life of the project. Can we be sure enough to put something on a ballot at this point when we know that cap management is going to be an issue? And I know that's an awful lot to ask you in a room where a camera's running and all that, but this is the challenge facing the community, and that's why you get paid the big bucks, right?
If I could interrupt just with that answer, and just to help that one, you can put into that. So I think the committee and the public need to look at this as if you've got a max of $85 million, you work backwards. So it's not a difference in numbers, it's a difference in scope. Right? You have a number, so you have a number, it's generated with a scope of work. So if the number is static, then the scope needs to change, or the scope changes, then the number changes and the scope is static. So one or the other. So I think what we're hearing is the number is static, that means the scope may change. Okay?
And we can't answer that, but I would agree with Dave that we certainly, I know we have been, and I would assume RGB as well, has worked within a budget-constrained number. It happens all the time, and you've got to figure out how to work to that number.
So, in that regard, I had that same thought. We're going to, if we have a cap, which I believe we all believe that 85 million is the number, I think we just have to be prepared to make adjustments down the road as to how we go. Maybe we have a plan to do X, Y, and Z, but maybe we're not going to be able to do Z at this point.
That's exactly right, Mr. Chairman, and that is what we're contemplating. We're contemplating before we've got anything other than, and I don't mean to say this in a pejorative way, I just want to make sure that we're perfectly clear. Before we've got a complete budget for a project, we're saying this is our limit. We're going to go with this limit because we know that the harm that may be visited upon a community because we exceed that limit is such that we need to have a hard cap. Therefore, any management going forward is management in scope, not budget, which does mean that we are deciding that changes in the future are going to have to be changes to the modification of Curtis Corner as it exists today, changes in the finishes to the new addition, changes in the scope of the project, perhaps modification of the middle school to recognize some savings so that those monies can be put to the new structure, changes to the scope of the project at the elementary schools. We're not going to be able, if we go ahead and we lock in a referendum at $85 million, we're not going to be able to change the program for the next 5 years without causing significant harm to the operating program at the school department. We just need to all be fully aware of that and know that what we're doing is saying this is a hard cap,
Right.
not a negotiable cap.
And on the same page, just like I think, Dave, when the numbers for Curtis Corner, we backed into that, correct, in terms of, we know what so at some point, we back into a number, and let's say, I think the numbers we were using were $400
a foot for new construction, and we backed into about 125 for renovation.
Right, and 125 is kind of, would you say, a light touch in some cases?
It's 125, a general aggregate of that square footage. So some areas of that school may receive 200, others may receive 80. Depending about that. But again, like I said the other night in a meeting, we're used to doing this. This is how you work. So you just do deductive analysis of what you can afford with different levels of packages. You'll have a hefty contingency. Hopefully it goes well during construction, that you use that contingency money for items to improve some of those levels of finishes.
Chair, can I ask RGB what the per square foot figures were at the Columbia Street project?
3.
I believe we had carried about $350 for new construction and $250 for renovation.
Okay. So this is significantly less for the existing space that we're budgeting.
Right, but at Columbia Way, we did have a much heavier renovation where we were kind of gutting that corridor all the way from the new entry to the media center.
I think, Amy, you also have to look at time, right? So we wasted another year. It took longer. There's a 6% inflation at that point. You'd be at the same position you are in the high school. You'd have to do some deductive cost analysis at the high school as well. How much you can afford for new additions would be primary, secondary would be your envelope, and then tertiary would be the finishes, whatnot. You could upgrade at a later time.
I agree. I understand the inflation. I think the concern that I have is that we all walked through Curtis Corner. I went there 30 years ago. It looks very much the same as it did then. It needs significant renovation for that to be the flagship high school, even if there's going to be construction of an addition to expand the size of the building. And I'm very concerned that there's not going to be much funding available to renovate the building the way that it should be. So we're already having the renovation per square foot as opposed to what we would have been at the Columbia site. I have concerns.
So the way you have to look at this is both Columbia Street and Curtis Corner are operating buildings. If there was a difference where one building was isolated or perhaps even vacant and you'd have to go in there and kind of revitalize it, it would add a little bit more cost. So you have to look at it that way. It's the same. We're looking at the same structure. I think the difference our study looked at is the expansion capabilities. The site was a huge factor, and the logistics of that site within the Kids for Safety. Those are the three really differences why we believe Curtis Corner kind of stuck out to be a better school solution for South Kingston than the high school. And I think you as taxpayers ought to look at that for the future as well. It's always good to add on. You always have another bond. This won't be the end of the bond referendums forever. There'll be different phases that other districts face all the time. You have to look at that. So what we'll do is we'll give you that analysis, but I can tell you right now, we're going to go from the outside in, right? We're going to button up the envelope. We're going to make sure it has a new roof, windows, ventilation, and heating systems are all done so the building's operating correctly. When it comes down to finishes, we're going to try to give certain areas more finishes than others, or more 21st century touch than others. And you could have a wish list that's generated from what is an excess contingency. And those wish lists could be interior finishes upgrade or certain areas upgrade. And we'll go through that whole list. And that's really when you get to stage 3, when you get to the actual working drawings, when a contractor's bidding on that stuff, so that we can see that, and we'll guide you through that whole point, so that at bid time, you're not just going to have one number. You're going to have a variation. You're going to have a base number. You may have some add alternates and some levels. So there's a lot of work to get from here until there, but it's not going to be an unfolding where everyone's amazed at that point. You'll be walked through the whole point.
So looking at the overall plan, potentially other places like Broad Rock could get less. Is that correct?
we're working right now with Broad Rock to, Tracy's actually working on a different plan for the superintendent and the administration to review first. We haven't done that.
Okay.
We're trying to save money on the middle school by maybe its configuration. Instead of 2 arms, have 1 arm. Stuff like that we're looking at. And you're going to do that naturally on even Curtis Corner, we came up with a 30,000 feet plan. It had a lot more effort into it because we really wanted to vet out if that plan was going to work or not. But that plan may change as well. Not as much the program spaces, but maybe the configurations and whatnot to make it less expensive.
Okay.
If I can share, we are taking a look at Broad Rock because it feels as though the existing design, the way it sits right now for our current, the most recent review and conversation around stage 2, feels like it's a lot. And we're looking at one cohort of children added. So currently there are 2 grade levels. We're talking about having 3. So it feels as though we can take a look at that. We know that the cafeteria is something, though, that we have to seriously consider with adding 200-ish students. And then I do want to share that I feel as though the footprint of Curtis Corner, I'm going to say one word, flexibility. In education today, and I know that maybe not everybody at the table has, spent years in a classroom where you want to differentiate to do what's right for children. And whether you were in a classroom 30 years ago or you're in there today, more so today than 30 years ago, you need to be able to differentiate. You need to be able to have flexible opportunities. And when we've walked through, gone through, lived in the facility of Curtis Corner, there is a lot of opportunity to have that opportunity for a flexible environment without needing to do huge amounts of renovation to the existing building. And so, and I feel very, very, very confident in saying that because I have lived through it in similarly aged buildings in another district, where we have taken out one classroom in a wing. Now that hallway space becomes part of where that classroom was. And now as a classroom teacher in a neighboring classroom in that wing, I now am able to have an opportunity for a small group. So instead of having children who might be struggling I taught math, at a level in math, they don't have to go down the hall, around the corner, off in a corner and be segregated with another specialist who's working with me. We can quickly differentiate, use the space outside. In our tours, as we visited other sites, we went to Cranston a couple of weeks ago and then recently went to Barrington Middle, and we saw the use of those shared spaces. It's very popular now, whether in a renovated building or in a new site, as we saw in Barrington. So when I was hired here and walked through the high school, it was a concern of mine what the future would look like at Columbia Street. And to be able to, there are many, many, many wings. The structure of it is very cellular. And it doesn't necessarily, it feels to me, but it doesn't necessarily feel like it lends itself to being able to have those spaces. And I know if you saw my presentation, you saw an example of a school that we had done in taking a very traditional hallway and how it was opened up without really putting huge amounts of dollars into the other spaces, but it dramatically changes. It can impact 10 classrooms in that wing by just doing that one little piece. So that's why, to me, the layout, and I just felt like I needed to kind of share that from an educational perspective, why that layout feels like it has a lot of opportunity, while I respect the fact that folks may not see that vision if you've not maybe walked through it for the last 10 years of your professional life.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, I just want to comment on that very briefly because I think it's important to really focus on what was just said by the superintendent. What she has said is $62 million added onto and put into Curtis Corner produces a better educational outcome, a better educational environment at least, than $62 million into Columbia Street. That's a really important thing for us to remember. The folks who are in classrooms teaching every single day are telling this committee and are telling the town council and are telling the community $62 million into a new structure appended to the existing structure is preferable. It'll be a better space for us to teach in, and we believe, say the experts who do this, it'll be better for our children to learn in than putting $62 million into the existing structure at Columbia Street. Now, there's been a lot of discussion about which buildings are better and worse depending on Jacobs. Jacobs ranked our high school as our best structure, and it ranked Curtis Corner as one of our worst structures. But Jacobs, the engineering firm, did not concern itself with the educational flexibility, the educational appropriateness of the space. They were looking at the air conditioning units, they were looking at the roof materials, they were looking at the physical structures. Physically, Columbia Street is a solid building. Physically, the cinder block structure that is Curtis Corner is not as solid. It shouldn't be surprising to us that the engineers would see the one building as preferable to the other. The educators prefer Curtis Corner to Columbia Street. That's really important. So the question that the committee and the town council and the community has to answer is, can we make sufficient improvements to the structure that the engineers worry about to get to a good educational environment? And that's why we've got an OPM, and that's why we've got an architect, and we've got to get to that answer. That's what the Stage 2 application is all about.
Rob, if I could expound on that for a second as a committee.
Can I just, in case you want to kind of...
Go ahead.
I'm just asking in case you want to respond to what I say, in case I'm not making sense. When I look at Jacobs, and I've analyzed and overanalyzed it, and Rob's absolutely right that FCI percentage is lower, which makes it better at Columbia Street. Columbia Street is also better than Broad Rock. So they, when they ranked that, gave a lower rating to that high school, current high school today, than they did to Broad Rock today. So with that, you start to consider the metric that they're using. From the person who today is in charge of a long-term budget, the amount of money that needed to be invested in a site that is, and if you consider hazards next door, we're looking at, over 250,000 square feet. So that's a lot of responsibility when Jacobs identified the mechanical air units on the roof, $3+ million needed to be put in. Roof of $3 million needed to be done. $2 million worth of windows, $700,000 in fire alarm system. As compared to Curtis Corner, same thing, mechanical roofing windows, but 1.8 for mechanical, 1.3 for roofing, $300,000 for windows. Those were all when you take a look at the significant dollars from a priority 1 and priority 2 status. So financially, what we needed to put into the two different sites. So the metric that they used is that FCI rating, but I guess if we are having a hurricane, that building is rock solid.
So let's also be clear about the FCI. The Facility Condition Index is what FCI is. The Facility Condition Index is a real estate investment tool. It's a tool designed to tell investors whether or not this building is one that you can buy and not expect to have to put more money into than you can afford to make money on flipping, owning, holding, whatever. But it's a real estate investment tool. It's not a tool designed to tell us whether or not it's the best place for teachers to teach or kids to learn.
So if I could I agree with you, Linda. I agree with you, Rob. I just want to, the process we went through for the high school was a good process. And I know it was frustrating because it took so long and it cost a lot of money. But according to the Jacobs report, this is what RIDE wants you to do. They want you to go down this road and evaluate it. And we did evaluate it. So you can't say that we didn't do our due diligence to get where we are today with Curtis Corner. But if I'm not mistaken, and I just read on these meeting minutes, and I was here at the last meeting, I think the building committee and the school committee voted to move ahead with Curtis Corner. So we don't have a lot of time what we need to do right now. we shouldn't waste time talking about what would have or could have been with Columbia Street. I think that's history now. I think we need to move forward with Curtis Corner. I think you just heard educationally that we can do it and we should do it. I think you heard financially that we have our limits and what we are up against. And I think we need to put all our brains together and effort together to go through with this and to move forward, not to expound on the past or what could have been and would have been. I think that's just going to waste more time. It's going to distract us from what we need to do.
Mr. Chairman, I can't let that lie. I will say this. I think that all of us who care about this community have an obligation to make sure that we bring our neighbors along in this project. We cannot leave questions unanswered. We cannot have folks who are whose concerns have not been addressed. We have an absolute obligation to make sure that folks know that we're not just ignoring some big blind spot, that we're thinking about these things, that we're addressing these things, and that we're analyzing them as we go.
I think I said the same thing, Rob.
I have a question on the Curtis Corner project. Budget, of course, is a top priority. What is? I haven't gotten any clear direction as to what is happening with school administration, whether that's going to be folded into the addition or not, because that's a big component at this point. So
right now we've kept it alongside. We're not going to incorporate it because of its
all right
cost. If we find that costs are in line, that would may be an option, and certainly that may be on a wish list to renovate some of that school if you have money left over, i.e. the mechanical or the layout system, which seems to be the two complaints: the installation value and the layout.
All right, thanks.
Students first.
I have a Columbia Street question, not debating where it should be. I feel strongly that Curtis Corner is a great spot.
The line here, moving forward.
My concern with Columbia Street, and I think that this is a concern for many community members, is now what happens to that building. And I know, Rob, that you've taken some steps to start that process, and I don't pretend to be a lawyer. So my two primary questions are, if I'm reading the document correctly that you'd sent, that the current owner of the building is not in fact us, it's Bank of America. Is that accurate?
No, the town of South Kingstown owns the Hazard building, the land adjacent to the Hazard building, a field adjacent to the land that is adjacent to the Hazard building, the practice field, and the land under the high school. We own those in fee simple, subject to what is a purported reversionary clause. There's in the deed that gave, in the will that gave us title to the high school property, and in the will that gave the title to the Hazard building land, there are two different, in each will, there's a restriction that says you'll use it for school purposes. If you don't use it for school purposes, I'm going to stick with the high school piece for now.
Land or building? Those
land.
Are separately owned?
No, the improvements to the land run with the land unless you've got a condoization or something going on, and that's not the case here. We don't have anything that would split the building ownership off. The will from 1946, I believe, that gave the land where the high school was built to the town said you can have this land for a high school. Should you ever stop using it as a high school, then the title reverts to, I'm only giving it to you for that purpose, but it reverts to Wakefield Trust, which has subsequently been acquired by Bank of America. Therefore, Bank of America has that interest. If it ceases to be used as a high school by the town, Bank of America's title in the land vests under the will, under what the will purports to be the case, vests, and Bank of America is to sell the property and to use the proceeds from the sale of the property for a scholarship fund that it would set up. Remember, this was Wakefield Trust that they had in mind in 1946, and they would allocate scholarships to high school graduates from South Kingstown. That was the scheme. In the 1980s, the state legislature enacted legislation that says those sorts of restrictions in wills are void. They're void. because we cannot have the dead hand of folks who used to live in a community controlling the futures of communities going forward.
So I guess it seems to me that okay, so that kind of clarifies mainly what I understood already. So here are my questions. One is, why not let Bank of America take control of this building and then sell it and then give us scholarships? Like, why is, hold on one second. So that's one question. Like, why is that not a bad plan? Because it seems like selling this building is not going to be an easy thing. Nobody's, right? So why not let them deal with that burden?
Okay.
Secondly, it seems like that's not the plan we're going with. So let's say we can't sell this building. Let's say now we get the ownership of it and we can't sell it. What kind of burden does that leave upon the town and taxpayers? Because it seems like that's a pretty good potential.
So those are good questions. The first answer to the question is Bank of America has no right to the property. Remember, what I said was not voidable, but voided. The interest that was purported to be transferred in 46 is no more. The state statute wiped it out. They don't have a legal right to it. It will never arise because the statute says these are void.
But don't we have to pursue some kind of legal action to make that
Our lawyers have advised
real,
that we would like to pursue a quiet title action. And the reason you do a quiet title action is because whenever you have any question that could affect the marketability of your title, you want to get it off. You want a judge to say, this, you're right, this was voided, this is not an issue. Court order says, title clear.
Is that any kind of lengthy or costly process?
It should not be. Again, we've been trying to talk to Bank of America about this, and they haven't returned our calls, frankly, because it's just a pain. It's a nuisance. They've got these sorts of things that pop up with all of the subsidiaries that they've acquired over the years. This is not an asset that they want. This is not, Bank of America is not in the business of doing the bidding. Now, in the case of the 46 will, that's the high school land, in the case of the Hazard building, that will was written in 1880. They're not in the business of making the wishes of people long gone come to fruition for small towns in New England that they have really very little connection to. That's not their business. They don't make money on it. They don't want to be doing it. They don't even want to be answering the calls about, hey, this thing popped up. What do you want to do here?
But I would imagine it's somewhat of a frequent thing, right? Like, it's not like they've never encountered this before. Like, we're the first town with a will. So they must have some process for somebody who's the point person that says, all right, you deal with this because we don't want to deal with this, correct?
I imagine there is someone we haven't found, or I haven't been told about who that person in Bank of America is. But this isn't, this is not a winning business proposition for any firm.
So then what? So let's say we find said person in Bank of America,
Well, again,
we get our quiet title,
So you're
then
okay. So
how do we sell this building?
I really want to reiterate the fact that this is not a question of taking something from Bank of America that Bank of America has a vested right in or has an interest in. They don't. The statute voided the provision in the wills that says this will go to Bank of America. That doesn't exist. The quiet title action is simply to make sure that nobody asks your questions again. That's really what it's about. It's making sure that...
Another word for that would be clearing the title.
Clearing the title.
So that there's no potential of questions, so that when the property transfers to the new owner, as well as the fact that they would probably be getting a mortgage or something like that, they'd want to make sure that there's no possibility of anyone coming back and saying that we own this land.
Right. We don't want the PTA, 10 years from now saying, hey, this isn't right and you owe us money. I mean, you need to just, you don't need to, because the statute did this. But it's good practice, because it's not a very lengthy litigation, because it's not a big deal, to go in and say, Your Honor, we got this will, we got this statute, the statute wins, right?
It's kind of like, another way to explain it, when you buy a property, there are times when people take out mortgages, but they never get removed from title. when they're paid off. So you're looking at a property to buy, and all of a sudden they find that there's $100,000 that's owed to XYZ Bank. We know that it's not the case, but you want to clear that so it's not even an issue and it's clear and marketable title for the property.
Okay, so it seems to me what you're saying is it's not necessary, but it's good practice, and it avoids cloudiness in the future. That seems like a sufficient answer to me. So then my second question, though, was we go through all that, we get that clarity, the peace of mind, so that we can sell this in good faith. Let's say we can't sell it, because we all know that that's a possibility. What are the ramifications of us kind of having this giant white elephant in town?
So on the 22nd of February, at 1 p.m. at the high school cafeteria, we will have a community meeting, perhaps the first of more than one, to start asking the question, what do we want to do with the property? What do we think is an appropriate reuse of the Columbia Street site? There's all sorts of possibilities here. We've got the town engineer looking into the expense of demolition. We know the value of land. It may well be the case that cleared land is worth more than the land with the building. If it's necessary for us to clear the land and then sell the land to get to the vision that the community identifies, that's an option. There may be an adaptive reuse out there. We're going to put a request for information out to the market sometime this month. We're hoping to have the 22nd meeting and then put an RFI to the development community out the week after that, so that we can begin to ask developers, what do you think you could do here? What do you think might make you money as adaptive reuse if the land were cleared under various scenarios? So the answer is we don't know yet, but what we do know is that land without a building is valuable. What we think we know is that the building is a really hard adaptive reuse, that it's going to be difficult because of the nature of the construction, because it's just heavy concrete construction. Trying to put in plumbing for toilets for condos is not going to be easy. It's an expensive reuse.
To your point and to her questions, and while it is important because most of us sitting at the table are members, are community members for our town, it is our business, but that is not a charge of this school building committee, correct?
No, actually, I think this is a charge of the school building committee. The school building committee is referenced in our charter, and it says whenever there's a need for, essentially, I'm paraphrasing here, whenever there's a need for a school building committee, the town council shall establish one. This is the disposal of a school building. I think that this is the sort of thing, and there hasn't been a specific charge by the town council with regard to this building, but this is the sort of thing that a school building committee would often deal with. It's a kind of thing that the council's looking for advice on. Should we go to the market? Should we demolish? Should we keep the building as it is? I think it is something that the school building committee has within its purview. If we need a specific charge from the council, to get some clarity on that, I think we could ask them for that.
I agree with Rob on that, but I think to your point, I think where you want to draw the line is it's not a school committee issue. It's a school building committee issue and a town council issue.
I have a quick question, Rob. If you, way down the road, you sell the building, sell the land, what happens to that money? Does it go to the scholarships, or does it go to, could we put it toward the building maintenance of the schools?
So, good questions. The answer is this. The will provision was voided by the state statute. So the idea that Mowry, I can't remember her first name, but the widow Mowry donated the land for this purpose. The fact that Mrs. Mowry wanted there to be scholarships if we stop using it as a high school is nice. It was a wonderful intent. It's a nice thing. But scholarships in 1946 for college were a lot different universe than scholarships are today. Because the will provision was voided by the state statute, we're out of the environment where Mrs. Mowry's intent is the thing that controls public policy. The public policy will be established by the town council, And in the absence of a new policy established by the town council for the proceeds of taxes off of this, it'll go into the general treasury because that's what our current existing policy is with regard to all property tax revenues. They all go into the general revenue.
Well, I only say that because with the ride regulations, I guess, the 3% from the school budget was supposed to go towards building maintenance, but you can use that 3% to pay down your bond, which leaves us right where we are right now. So if we were to use that money from the sale of that building and land.
So we have multiple scenarios. We've got a disposition of the property that actually costs us money. That's certainly a possibility. We decide the only way to really proceed is to demolish the building, and I'm making up numbers. I have not heard from the town engineer at this point, but let's assume that it costs $2 million to demolish and clear the property and prepare it for construction. The prepared property sells at $150,000 an acre. We've got 7 or 8 acres. Sells for $1 million. We've lost $1 million in the transaction. That's a possibility. Another possibility is that we break even. It only costs us $1 million and we get $1 million. Another possibility is that we actually do see some profit. We get lucky and somebody's willing to pay us $2 million and we make $1 million on the transaction. That $1 million by current policy would go into the general revenues and would be available for essentially property tax reduction. It would just be money that we don't have to pay on property taxes. If we were to do, there's other possibilities. I mean, the other possibility is we decide to hold it and to become a landlord. We rent out portions to the Boys and Girls Club. We rent out portions to the Johnny Cake Center. We rent portions out to doctors' offices. That becomes a continuing operational expense for the town because we're now the landlord. And you're running around making sure that the roof gets patched and the air conditioning unit gets fixed when it breaks. So what we've got to work through in the next several months is what we're going to do, which of those worlds we want to exist in, and how we position ourselves best to be in the world that we choose to be in.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments?
Yeah, I don't know if this is worth it or not, but does it make any sense to put this issue as a separate line item on our agenda?
I would say yes. Any other comments regarding the Stage 2 necessity of construction application update?
I have one for Dave. I know, Rob, you talked about the budget and the scope of work, which are fluid, one's solid, one's fluid. So if we go into Curtis Corner and we find it needs more money, the deeper you go, so it's not like you're walking back in time as you go into that school. Does the money come from, can you take it from the elementary schools? Because those buildings are not getting anything right now. So I'm just wondering how that would work.
So we looked at what would happen if, say, you dug a hole and a spring of water happened. There's provisions to make a second floor in that school so that you would minimize how much impact you have on the site. Any decision like that we would make programmatically, we'd first go to the school administration to see if it works and it functions first. If it does, we'd come up with a plan and we'd come back to the building committee and present it.
I have another question about Broad Rock. So, in my mind's eye, putting an addition on that obviously is going to be a significant cost, and I really commend your efforts to try and consider reworking that to minimize that cost. There was a suggestion by a community member to reshuffle and not do an addition by changing Peacedale into what is Broad Rock, 5 and 6, and maybe keep pre-K there. Fit the 4 elementary schools into 3, so we wouldn't be closing any of those buildings, and then keeping Broad Rock as 7 and 8. And I just haven't heard any discussion, and maybe there has been, about the feasibility of that option, because if that could work and we could save all that money, pour money into 3 elementary schools, I don't know programmatically, but it seems at a very surface level like that has potential.
As I've quickly taken a look at it, and I don't have that in front of me right now, but walking through the space you need for the enrollment, it's not something that could happen now. I don't know 10 years out, but we're not there today.
Are you saying we don't have enough space for that configuration? We have too many kids? In what regard? Because I know the elementary schools used to have could handle a much larger capacity, but what scenario does it not work in? In what?
I have this. I've reviewed it. I have it. I mean, unless it's changed. Thank you. So the buildings that we have today, give me just one sec. So for example, I'm looking at classrooms as they exist today. So I'm not looking at classrooms and renovating because it doesn't feel like we have the money to go and knock down walls and say total square footage. I'm looking at, so for example, 21 classrooms at Matunic. Matunic and West Kingston are the same. So if we have 21 rooms, but we also have an art and a music room, and I've had this conversation with a few folks, it feels as though we don't want to get rid of those rooms. You can do art on a cart, but it doesn't feel like this community would be excited about art on a cart. But I may be wrong, and I've been in a district where we had years we needed to have art on a cart and years that we could then take a room back with a Navy population that happens, that fluctuation. So now you're at 21 minus those two, then you may have an alternative learning program, you may have a severe profound, so you may have 1 or 2 rooms that you want to have, that we do today, have support programs, specialized programs for students who need those. And then in addition, if we look at, and I'm assuming, again, the stage 2 that we've been looking at, whether it goes to fruition today or 3 years or 5 years or 8 years, and when we think about the educational perspective, that we probably would want to look at wings, at least in those buildings, 2 wings, and utilize the hallway to be more instructional space, which would mean you may want to reduce a classroom to do that. And again, when we looked at Eden Park, when we looked at Barrington Middle School, the way they had that shared community space, and I can show pictures to folks who may not understand what I mean, then that would reduce down. So now when you're looking at the total classrooms, knowing that that's what you want to have for your plan to fit students in there, and again, not thinking we're going to knock down walls, then when I take the population that we have, or that we'd probably have, and I only did like a year or 2 because we would be redistricting and moving students now, like it's not like this is in 10 years, then I did have too many students to fit in the buildings. So even today, if we were to take the students today and we put 5th grade out today, we would be maximized today within our current elementaries, in the 4 elementaries. Again, utilizing the classrooms that we have today and leaving art and music as rooms. So that's, I don't necessarily have a charge from a school committee saying, Linda, that's what you must do or not do. You can, if you assume those rooms and don't have them as assigned rooms and use those as home rooms, then that does impact a little bit.
Linda, were you saying bringing 5th grade back to the elementary schools they wouldn't fit? Is that what you mean at this point as well?
No. 5th grade would fit. Okay. 5th grade would.
Just wanted to clarify that. I wasn't sure.
Yes, but taking our pre-K to 4 population today, taking our pre-K to 5 today, they would fit. They'd be maxed out. Our plan is to put 5th grade back, and that's the numbers, but we have looked, I know that it's come up a couple of times about using Peacedale, but I'm hoping to sit down and meet with folks, and sometimes when folks they've had ideas, or we take a look at enrollment or we take a look at the building structure, that I'll sit one-on-one and we'll go through. I'm happy to do that. I enjoy doing that. It helps me. I'm happy to have those conversations with folks.
I think it's just important to clarify that we're doing whatever we can to minimize costs. And it does seem like Broad Rock is a big expense when we have so many existing buildings, in the shuffle, just making sure that we're as efficient and as wise as we can be. So.
And I'm just being very honest and transparent. I absolutely agree. And Tracy and Dave will tell you, I absolutely agree that we need to look at Broad Rock again through a little bit of a different lens. But I also, when I'm thinking education, I don't want to think about children like sardines.
Well, no, yeah. I don't think there's anybody that says we want our kids to have a worse education, right? We want a better educational experience, and that's why we're around the table. But we also, want to do it in the most cost-effective way possible, in the way that's going to include all these not educational but necessary updates to our buildings that are structural updates. So it's a dance, and I just felt like that was something that hadn't been publicly addressed and needed to be. So thank you.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, I'm sorry,
Sure.
Just a thought, and I hate to backtrack a bit, but if I can have your indulgence for just a second. A thought occurs to me about the Bank of America key, hand them the keys strategy, and I think it's an important point, so I just want to make sure everyone's aware. I actually think we would be in jeopardy of being sued by somebody who says we improperly handed the keys to Bank of America more than we would be in jeopardy, certainly in more, than if we didn't give the keys to Bank of America if they said they wanted them. Because we don't have a legal authority and they don't have a legal right. If we were to give the keys to Bank of America, a nonprofit organization could easily come forward, a private sector developer could easily come forward and say, you violated your fiduciary duty, you had no authority to give that property to this without going out to bid, your action is wrong and I've suffered damage because of it. We can't do it. Not only shouldn't we, but we can't.
Thank you. All right, so next up on our agenda is item number 6, owner's project manager updates. Are there any updates at all other than what we've talked about?
As far as projects concerned, we have a handful of punch list items that we're working through. Those will probably be complete by the end of the week. We're working on a turnover package to deliver that to facilities so that all the warranties, training manuals, and everything else are in your hands. But other than that, everything's pretty much wrapped up.
Thank you. All right, item number 7. I unfortunately couldn't make that last Barrington visit, but how did that go?
I don't want to. I hate to be the one to speak because
I've heard good words.
Well, I'm grateful to Barrington. I'm grateful to Sam for allowing us to, give us their precious time too. The principal of the school and the superintendent both walked with us, so kind of gave us their experience as well, which I know them, and I've done the tour before, and I've had meetings in the building. I was next door to it all last school year with a professional development, so I kind of watched it evolve and know the principal very, very well, so talked with him throughout the experience. But it's eye-opening, and I'm grateful for the folks that were able to attend, and it probably would be better for them to be able to share, and we had community members there, and I'm grateful that they took that time out of their lives.
So I had I was able to attend, and it was actually quite eye-opening, and the building itself, you could see our high school represented there because it was an 800 to 900 student facility, and granted there were components that would not obviously be conducive to high schoolers, but it was very eye-opening to be able to talk with the superintendent and the principal as well. also, we talked to a handful of students as we were walking through. There were students walking through, and it was really interesting to get their perspective. And I highly recommend anybody. I know they said they were very open to community members coming up. I would highly recommend people going to see what they do with this space. And to Linda's point, especially with like the elementary schools, when she talks about opening up the hallways for instructional space, that's what was so intriguing, and to see it in action and to see what they've done with the space, and with the cost to the building. Obviously, it's a new build and it was a different situation than we have, but it was really eye-opening. To me, more glaring actually even than the Cranston Elementary School, only because of what we were able to experience there. What was also super interesting is as we were walking out, our middle school girls basketball team was pulling in, and it was like, aw. It was a little like, I'm like, oh, they're going to get so excited when they walk in there, and then they're going to go home. But it really was eye-opening, and I highly recommend other people take the field trip. It's worth it. It was only a 35-minute ride. There was no traffic. Right, Mr. Beasley?
And Curtis Field is the rec center, so it's not so bad.
Right. Yeah, no. It was, I recommend people going to take a look. And if we can get maybe a slideshow for people who can't take the drive, but...
That would be great. Anyone else that visited?
I won't go into detail, but I was very impressed by their variety of security features. Some that seemed very expensive and some that seemed really not very expensive. But there's a variety of them, and definitely things that we should be considering as we go down this road.
One final thought is every space, and Linda pointed it out, but you experienced it as you were walking through and you were seeing students in their spaces, but every corner of the building was an instructional space. There was not, like if you walk through the high school, the corridors, the corners, the nooks and crannies, not educational spaces at all. Even in Curtis Corner when we walk through, it's every single nook and cranny in this building was specifically gauged to educating students.
Any other comments before we move on? All right. Has the communications work group met? Do you have a meeting scheduled at all?
I don't know. Are you going to take it, Rob? Do you want
I actually think we should, and the committee could set a schedule right here for the next meeting. I think we've got a quorum of that group. I would suggest that we do need to meet, and perhaps this Friday would make sense. I'm sorry? What's good for you guys? Friday's not going to work. Mid-morning Friday could work. Mid-morning, 10 o'clock? Okay. 8 o'clock is fine by me.
I can't do 8. We have our leadership team meeting.
Monday, you have a leadership meeting?
Monday afternoon works for me.
I could do 2.
Yeah, that would work for me. So let's Monday 2:30. I'll check with Councilwoman Kelso, but I think that's our.
All right. So tentatively, you're scheduled to have a meeting Monday at 2:30.
Yeah.
At Town Hall.
Right. So this is just a working group for the public's awareness. This is not a subcommittee. This is just a task force of 4 or 5 members of this committee. But our meeting will be here at 2:30 on Monday. Anyone who wants to attend is welcome.
Thank you. All right. Item number 9 is comments from the community. If anyone would like to speak, we're going to have a time limit of 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman,
Sure.
On my last statement, anyone from the public who wants to attend is welcome. Other members of this committee who want to attend may not do so. This
Correct.
is a task force, and we're not going to get into a
Open meetings.
full subcommittee or quorum of this group.
Well, would anyone like to come up and talk? You have 5 minutes.
If you're going to be live broadcast, you have. You got it?
That's what happens when you have one hand. Okay. Dorald Beasley. So I think it was the last building committee meeting, or it may have been the one before it, but I made a statement during the public comment portion that what had been shown that day for the possibility of moving the high school to Curtis Corner was something that I thought would the good was heading in the right direction, and there was a little bit of applause in the audience. But okay, I'm going to have to kill that applause for now. After visiting both Curtis Corner, taking the tour of Curtis Corner, and then going to Barrington's Middle School, it is my opinion that doing a half reno, half new project at Curtis Corner for the high school is not what we need. And I'm not sure the way the Stage 2 is written right now with additions to Broad Rock and that it's going to pass, that it would pass in November. So the Curtis Corner, looking through that, when we walk through there, okay, just a few things, right? The building has no sprinklers because it wasn't coded needed back in the day, so you're going to have to put sprinklers in the building. When we were visiting, we went into a classroom on the west side of the building, the one closest to the pond. There was no heat. There's no heat in those classrooms, seems like, during the winter. So when you think about it, that whole building needs to would have to have a whole new HVAC system. It's sprawling, double H connected building. To do that properly, to have the air quality that, like Kurt, when we were in, that's one of the things that are just unbelievable at Barrington Middle School. The air, it's just, you walk in the building, it's like, wow. The air handlers, the things that actually move the air, they're in the walls. You don't hear anything. It's just silent. It's unbelievable. So how much would a new high school cost? So it would cost about $115 million. That's for $500 a square foot. I don't think $400 a square foot might be okay for what you're talking about at Curtis Corner. It's not what is going to be needed like in 3 years when you actually start bringing materials to the site because of cost increases. The Barrington Middle School, $480 a square foot, and that building is in operation today. I don't think $400 a square foot comes close to what we're going to need. So $500 a square foot So it ends up being $150 million. I also agree that there's not enough money being put into our other schools. Right now, it's just chump change in some respects for all the things that those schools need. So I would take another $30 million and put it into those schools, and then also the five or six million you need for the road stuff. So altogether, it's $150 million. Yeah, it's a lot of money, but I talked to, I got a lot of information, so if my time buzzes up, I'll come back. But so I went to the URI town and gown meeting there last week at URI, and I spoke to Senator Sosnowski and Representative Fogarty about the education aid, the new funding formula. And Representative Fogarty told me that she's already talked to the person who's in charge of that legislation in the House, and he told her that significant changes are going to be made. Things like maybe have some partial payment for transportation costs for communities. This year, or this coming year, we're getting $4.5 million from the state. This is the last year of that 10-year disaster, right? We're getting $4.5 million from the state, and our transportation costs are almost the same. So when you subtract our transportation costs projected from the proposed money that we're going to get, you have $75,000 left over. That's like $25 a kid is what's left over after paying for our transportation costs.
Doral, I'm going to give you 1 more minute.
Okay, so I think for sure that number is going to increase. We also have the $2 million of the 3% that we have to put aside every year for upkeep of the buildings that we can use for the first 2 or 3 years until RIDE picks up the 50%. Now, we also have over 200 students, well over 200 students from this community every year leave town to go to other high schools. They go to Prout, Hendricken, LaSalle. They go to Narragansett, North Kingstown, Cheraho, and other high schools in the state. I'm of the opinion that if you build a brand new high school, that at least a third of those students come back. Now, maybe more. So you build a high school for 171,000 square feet, which is equal to 900 students. But RIDE won't let us do that because we don't have 900 students put in the building right now. So that's where the administration thing comes in. You still build a 171,000 square foot building, including the administration area. But that whole area where the administration is going to be it needed at some point in time that we have to expand the building for more students, unfortunately, they move. And that space then becomes a school that can handle 900 students.
Doral, if you could finish up because you're about 3 minutes over.
Okay. We can do this. And it's going to it can happen. We can do it. And we need the assistance. In this moment in time in our town's history, we need the assistance from the NEA, RI, and NEASK. Every year, over the last 10 years in South Kingstown, 15 people have retired. That's the average, 15 last 10 years, 150 people. This past year, we dropped 34 people. We still have way too many employees working in this district. especially at the elementary school level. Our star ratings aren't where they should be. It's got nothing to do with the buildings. We're not getting our investment, our return on our investment in the elementary schools is not there. So if you have excess people working in a system and you're not getting your return on investment, the only thing you can do, you really need to look at how many people you have there. Now, we have a ratio right now of 6.4 to 1. I'm proposing that over the next 10 years, we go from where we are right now to 7.5. 20 years ago, we used to be 8.5. So we're going to go we're going to go halfway back to what we were over a 10-year period. That's not outrageous. That's 12 people a year. And so today we have 450. 10 years from now, we'll have 330. That's how we get to build this school so that NEA, the unions, need to come here halfway and meet us so our students can get a new high school, our taxpayers get the break that they need. And it's really a win-win in my estimation, it's also a win-win for the unions. Because right now, every year you have this problem where...
Darrell, I appreciate it, but you're at 10 minutes.
Well, you gave Bob Kavanaugh 20.
I don't think so.
Well, no, I guess that was the school committee.
Okay. Thank you.
Hi, Lauren Weinstock. So, to the point, it seems like a small point, but it's a big point in my mind about scheduling your communications meeting. I'm really happy to hear that's going to happen because sitting in this room today and hearing all of the information that's been covered, I think it's imperative that the community hear what's being discussed. This is really, really important, hearing about the geotech plans that are going to move forward at Curtis Corner, having Linda clarify and Rob, just about the Jacobs report and the many questions that people keep returning back to the Jacobs report, and having that clarified was really helpful. Hearing about disposition of the Columbia Street property and how that's being managed. I know the meeting on February 22nd was announced, but the time wasn't shared, and I think it's really important that that be shared publicly and widely. Everyone, I hope, will be able to come to that meeting. It'll be really important. 1 o'clock, thank you. And that's in the high school cafeteria. And then finally, I think the final point that my takeaway personally from this discussion today is that we've been spending so much time talking about buildings, square footage, numbers, and when we look at the raw numbers, we're not thinking about the educational rationale and the educational mission. And having that clarified today was incredibly important in my mind, that it's not just about the space and fitting people in spaces. And when we talk about people, we're talking about children. It's about how we use the space. And it's not just about the classrooms, but it's about all the other opportunities we provide to our students in terms of special education, the need for alternative learning spaces. I think about my child at Broad Rock and how she's doing technology and robotics and foreign language and PE, and there's band and orchestra and chorus. All of those things are really important and I think are very valued by our community. And so it's important to recenter around these issues because these are all part of our children's education. And when we just look at the numbers, I think that gets lost in the conversation. So any way we can communicate out what's being discussed here, I know this is being videotaped, people can watch it, but I often hear a lot of questions about many of these issues, and so much was addressed today that I really appreciate the time that you spent fleshing them out.
Thank you.
Make a quick comment on that. I mean, I know when we first started this committee, communication was a top priority, getting communication out to the public, because that was a problem. And I agree with you 100%. And I thought when we brought in some of our consultants, and I don't want to pick on Sam, but I thought that was part of their scope was to help us with communication and get that word out to the public. So
I do remember someone being at the initial meeting or two, right? Who was that?
yeah, because I mean that was one of our concerns, is that we weren't communicating enough out to the public, and that was why we were going to bring in somebody to help us with that. I think we've definitely been providing a disservice with communication out to the general public with what we're doing. I think we definitely need to step it up.
So I'll just respond. So the communication piece wasn't ultimately what was in our scope for this first step, but we are going to be including a succinct part of that for the go forward piece, Wayne. And I'm going to be giving Linda some kind of an outline of what we would suggest that approach to be. It doesn't mean that that's how the collective committees need to embrace it, but we've seen effective kind of, I'll call it pre-bond, bond campaign communication activities that really intertwine the stage two as well as the community communications around education around the bond, because I think those things are quickly going to become intertwined. So we'll have that as part of our proposal for this next step. And I think it's, while it wasn't unimportant before, a more methodical approach to how you treat communications for the next 10 months is imperative for your collective success and the community success. And we think there's a roadmap out there that we've seen that's worked in Barrington and East Providence. Other communities also engage differently, but and there's a lot of different pieces to it. There is kind of the public face of the communication and the support, if there is support around the bond. There's also has to be a I've mentioned this before, a non-district kind of sponsored activity as well to ensure that the district and the town can't say vote yes, they can say vote. I think you saw this in Westerly where there was some kind of crossover where I believe it was the school committee, but don't quote me on that, but where they were making endorsements as a school committee, which I think is, you're not supposed to do that. You can as individual community members. So we'll outline an approach for this process going forward that I hope will dovetail into the communications working group and hopefully provide at least an option for a plan for everybody to execute on.
Mr. Chairman, I have to comment on this. I want everyone to understand. It is not the job of this committee, it is not my job for sure, to sell anything to the public. Our job is to make sure that the public is well informed about the options available to it and the actions that the government is taking on their behalf. Our job is to make sure that the people know what we're doing with their tax dollars and what we're proposing to do with their tax dollars. Our job is not to tell them that this is the best thing to do with their tax dollars. That's their choice. That's that's completely within their discretion. The subcommittee concept is a difficult one for committees to deal with, and we've toyed with the idea of creating an actual subcommittee for this school building committee to deal with communications. Ultimately, the clunkiness, the cumbersomeness of that is such that it was decided we weren't going to be successful if we tried to have an actual subcommittee with regular meetings and, a routine agenda and that kind of thing. We decided that we were going to get a couple of folks, we let a handful of folks get together and talk about ideas that they could bring to this committee, and then the committee as a whole could take some actions. You're right that there was initially some discussion about having the OPM work with that group or work with the full committee. That actually had never been decided. To come up with a full-blown communications plan. At the time that the scope of work, the contract was entered into for Peregrine, this was not, a communication plan was not built into their initial scope of work because we were on a very straightforward glide path. We were looking at Columbia Street renovation. We were not looking at anything more complicated than getting through the Stage 2 application, which was essentially updating the application that had previously been submitted. Events have taken turns, and we find ourselves in new territory without anyone making fence posts or signposts for guidance here. it is a challenge right now. I think that the meeting that the small group will have on Monday is going to have to help us sort of get some guidance. I look forward to the report from that small group to this committee at the next meeting.
Okay. Next agenda item is item number 10, invoice and payments. Doral, I gave you 10 minutes and we're running close on time. Doral, you can send those to me and I'll distribute them to the committee. Number 10, invoice payments and contracts. Any news?
No, I think we worked out all the issues. I do have Martone's latest invoice that Tracy and I are reviewing. It's holding 10% retention, which is more than enough to finish up the handful of punch list items. So I'll be submitting that to Mary Ann by the end of the week.
Okay. Thank you. Item number 11, scheduling of future meetings. We were planning, JC, did we have one already scheduled? I can't recall off the top of my head. Okay.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, an observation about our meeting schedule, meetings, and items on the agenda. This has been a very busy couple of weeks with the school building committee meeting at the Curtis Corner Middle School, with the actions taken by the school committee, and we've gotten a lot of feedback at Town Hall about the sort of one writer in correspondence to this committee that this committee has received today called it a frenetic experience, that it's a very hurried, it feels very hurried and frenetic. I think that the public is feeling like it's hard to get their hands on information. This is back to the communications stuff. But one of the things we've heard often is, I wish your meetings were at times that I could attend. And I would strongly recommend that we move to probably fewer meetings, because I think the meetings with little bits of information all over the map is adding to that sense that there's a frenetic, almost, I wouldn't accuse us or anyone in the process of being chaotic, but appearing somewhat chaotic. I think that we should go to fewer meetings, and we should go to meetings at night. I feel strongly that the public will be better informed if those meetings are less frequent, and therefore feeding less sort of speculation, trying to fill the gaps between the bits of information coming out in a small number of meetings, a large number of meetings with small bits of information. And I think that meetings at night are likely to be viewed by more viewers live streaming and attended by more members of the community. So I put that on the table for discussion.
I am not opposed to that. I think it would be a good idea to move the meetings to the evening. My only concern would be we have other professionals here at the table that are not town employees, and also town employees that would be working outside their normal hours.
So I can work with town employees scheduling and sort of help folks, not feel like this becomes an overwhelming function. I think it's important for us to have the town professionals we have here advising us, Mark and Wayne in particular, as close as we get to folks in the business of reconstruction. So I think it's important for us to have the town experts on the panel. That having been said, this should not become something that's so burdensome that their lives become miserable. I can work to make sure that that doesn't happen.
And on the school side, is that okay? RGB and Peregrine and Bentley Downs. Okay.
Chair, I can offer the...
Can you bring the donuts? Sorry.
The town manager's office can coordinate. We do have a lot of other boards and commissions using the room at night. And then with the upcoming budget schedule, we can review the calendar and make a recommendation.
Yeah, I'm thinking at this point, my opinion would be March, early March.
Okay. And we can set a recurring, regular, and again, I'm making something up here, but let's say the first Wednesday of every month would be, that way it's a regular recurring meeting.
Yeah, I would endorse that approach, is that I'm sure for everybody, if you know it's always the first Wednesday, then you can start to plan around that recurring time frame. And I know we'll do everything to make that work.
Do you?
And I also think feeding it, we talked about this, I think, in previous meetings. It's great if it's the week, say, prior to a school committee meeting, because then if there is any direction or recommendation for a vote, then you've got that logical next step where it kind of can flow right into it. If it's after, then you're
So we can work offline, come up with a date that's going to work for everyone, and one that's going to be repeated on a monthly basis at this point.
Seems like that Wednesday has worked, at least with that overall cycle of building committee, which then precedes the following week's school committee, which I think makes a lot of sense for the school committee members.
It's monthly. Does that seem sufficient for you all? Does that seem that's
I think
appropriate?
it'll vary too, Melissa. There's going to
Sure.
be times of intense decision-making process.
Oh, absolutely. And I
have to call for that, but I think the once a month at least allows for information to kind of get a little bit more distilled and be relevant, as opposed, to Rob's point of every week or every other week you might have this, this up and down.
That's right. No, I think it's great, and I think we've proven to be flexible when we need to be, but having that scheduled thing, I think, would go a long way. I just wanted you guys to have feedback or input on whether or not you felt monthly was the appropriate span of time.
And in between those dates, there will be dozens of meetings that are happening offline, right, with leadership, planning, programming, assessment, all the work that Dave and Tracy are going to be doing. So it's certainly not static from one meeting to the next.
And then you'll have more information to share at those meetings than every 2 weeks.
But Kate just made a good point. The first Wednesday of the meeting is the PTG meeting at the high school, which would take her out of one or the other, and Chip as well. So I'd hate to kind of do that. So we could do the third Wednesday. That still puts us the Tuesday before a meeting. It just, for this time, it kind of,
Right, I get
we
it.
either have to make the decision, are we going to the third week of March before we meet again, or are we going to skinny it up and do it at the very end of this month?
I think third Wednesday is zoning, so on a Wednesday.
Yeah, so I think this is going to be an offline discussion. I think everyone should be involved in the discussion that's here on the committee.
Yep, and we can do a doodle poll. We can. There's nothing in open meetings that restricts the committee from
scheduling is
discussing
fine.
scheduling offline.
All right. Would anyone like to make a motion to adjourn? Do I hear a second? We are adjourned at 10:59. Thank you.